All right, Shalom. Giving all praises, honor, and glory to our power Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak, Quadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the hopeful elect of the tabernacles of David, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. Whomever you may be, and wherever you may be, to you I say Shalom, Yeshua, Shalom. All right, I'm going to bring up a bunch of things that I was looking into over the last day or so. All right, as I mentioned over and over and over. All right, Spirit's got me talking about this famine that's coming. All right, and so I was looking into some things. And I just typed in something basic, which was America's water shortage. All right, I'm gonna pull up some of this stuff here. I have a video that I'm gonna play, and we'll get a couple scriptures. Then that'll be it. All right. So it says America's water shortage is currently an urgent reality, driven by historic droughts and record low reservoir levels that have forced the federal government to mandate severe, unprecedented water cuts. On Friday, August 21st, 2026, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation released a sweeping new 10-year framework that will slash up to 40% of the water supply. And that's a major percentage. All right. It's not more than half, but it's almost half. All right. They will slash up to 40% of the water supply, roughly 3 million acre feet collectively allocated to California, Arizona, and Nevada from the endangered Colorado River system. All right. The historic water crisis spans critical environmental, structural, and political challenges across North America. All right. The historic Colorado River crisis. All right. The Colorado River Basin, which supports 40 million people and 5 million acres of farmland, is experiencing its worst supply depletion in history. Record reservoir lows. The nation's two largest reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, have plummeted to their lowest recorded levels. Right, the Deadpool threat, uh, not the Marvel character. Lake Powell's water levels are dropping toward the threshold where the Glen Canyon Dam will no longer be able to spin its turbines. If it drops lower, it faces a Deadpool status, meaning water can no longer flow past the dam, completely cutting off the water supply to the lower basin states. All right, power grid jeopardy. Beyond drinking water, the two dams provide electricity to millions of homes. All right, that's major. All right, you got Cuba. All right, one of the first to actually be experiencing constant, darkness and lack of food and so on and so forth. Now you got people talking about Gary, Indiana. All right, they're going on 2 weeks or so, something like that. And I looked into that NIPSCO company. All right, so I was looking to the NIPSCO, that what power company, whatever it is. All right, and so it stemmed back to two other companies. So I looked into them, and guess what? Those companies stem back to what? The elites, which we knew that without even having to look it up. But and so you wonder why Jake ain't getting no help. Well, look who owns the company that's supposed to be helping you out. All right, that's if any help does come, is going to be what they're doing right now, slow, very slow and steady, because they don't really have an intention of helping you. But sometimes things just have to get done, right? So yeah, interesting, right? But we knew these things, all right? The 2/3 don't understand these things. Let's see, what did I read? If it drops lower, it faces a Deadpool status quo. Okay, so I think I read that. Power grid jeopardy. Beyond drinking water, the two dams provide electricity to millions of homes. Diminished water flow has already slashed power outputs, threatening grid stability next year. All right, domestic pressures and urban strain. The crisis is not confined to the West. Across America, a combination of climate events, aging infrastructure, and legal battles are altering daily life. The Northeast hydropower slump. Long-term droughts in Canada have reduced the capacity of Quebec's hydropower. Newly built transmission lines aimed at feeding clean energy into New York City and New England are carrying far less power than expected, destabilizing clean energy plans. Like local restrictions and fines. It says ban decorative lawns in commercial zones and deploy water cops. handing out fines ranging up to $2,000 per violation. That's crazy. Severe infrastructure decay. Cities like Atlanta, Georgia, and Richmond, Virginia, are facing system failures and major main bursts due to rapidly aging water pipes. Yeah, this old infrastructure here. All right, you got places like China and Japan, all super advanced, extra clean and stuff like that. Meanwhile, you got America boasting about everything that there is to boast about. But why is your country so jacked up? Why are there so many homeless people? Why are there so many disgruntled veterans and things of that nature? Why are people in an uproar? Why are people angry at what the government is doing? All right, that's the sedition among men. All right. I mean, not sedition among men. Well, I mean, I guess you could say that too, but I meant to say uproars of the people. Systemic and human costs. 2.2 million Americans live without running water or indoor plumbing. A deficit that disproportionately impacts Latino and African American households at twice the rate of white families. I wonder why. See, you are the Israelites. Meanwhile, and they pushed you into these particular neighborhoods. Meanwhile, in territories like Puerto Rico, extreme droughts have triggered severe water rationing. Yep, that's the thing that's been talked about. Severe water rationing, requiring thousands of households to survive recurring 48-hour scheduled shutoff. There you go. See, this is what we just talked about dealing with Cuba. Not saying that was Cuba, but I was just, mentioning that. All right. I mean, but Puerto Rico, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, it's just that, you get the point I'm trying to make. All right. Puerto Rico, Cuba, Gary, Indiana. All right. Things are about to heavily hit the states. All right. Because America is always the least informed. Okay. The American people, that is, they're always the least informed. All right. But they will be hit the heaviest when things unfold. There's a little map thing there. Lake Powell. It says nearing Deadpool levels and loss of power generation. Okay. Is there anything else here? All right. So that's it from there. I had a scripture here which is going into, the ultimate missiles and destruction of Babylon the Great. But I do want to make a point here. It says a sword is Jeremiah 15:36. A sword is upon their liars, and they shall dote. A sword is upon her mighty men, and they shall be dismayed. A sword is upon their horses, and upon their chariots, and upon all the mingled people that are in the midst of her. Yep, this places of mixing melting pot. Babylon, all right, confusion by mixing. And there's different nationalities from all over it living here. And they shall become as women. Yep, when all this chaos has happened, Jacob's trouble, and ultimately when they hear about those missiles coming, which is what this is talking about here. A sword is upon her treasures, and they shall be robbed. Yep, they're going to be spoiled. Even it talks about in Revelation 18, no one buy their wares anymore. So that's another aspect to it. It says a drought is upon her waters, and they shall be dried up. For it is the land of graven images, and they are mad upon their idols. All right, therefore the wild beasts of the desert with the wild beasts of the islands shall dwell there, and the owl shall dwell therein, and it shall be no more inhabited forever, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. So what this is going into is the ultimate destruction of Babylon the Great. And those missiles are going to completely dry this place out. All right. It says he's going to stretch upon it. The line of confusion is going to be all desert from east coast to west coast, northern parts to the southern parts, and so on and so forth. Everything is going to be a completely dry desert. But you see the Lord actually doing this already to some degree. When you talk about the Euphrates and the Tigris River drying up to make way for the kings of the east, that's back east. But when it's like what we're talking about right now, Babylon the Great, well, the Lord is drying up these waters already, and whatever's left is going to be completely dried up by the nuclear missiles. All right, drought is upon her waters, and they shall be dried up, for it is a land of graven images. All right. Now I'm gonna pause right here because I have a video that I'm gonna play. It's pretty lengthy. I might it's like 10 minutes long, so I might speed it up a little bit, and then I'm gonna actually have to go into my other device to pull up some other things, and then we'll bring it to a close. All right, this is a video I pulled up the other day. We're gonna play it. Like I said, it's 10 minutes long, so I may try to speed it up a little bit. But if it is speaking too fast, I'll just slow it back down. All right.
34 feet. That's the number standing between tens of millions of Americans and a problem this country has spent decades trying not to think about. Not 34 feet of concrete or 34 feet of safety margin, 34 feet of water. And the people whose job it is to fix this are now facing a choice with no good answer. Because to save one lake, they may have to drain another. But we'll get to that. Out in the American Southwest sits two enormous man-made lakes, Lake Powell on the Utah-Arizona border and Lake Mead in Nevada and Arizona. Neither one is natural. Both were created by damming the same river, the Colorado. Powell sits between Glen Canyon Dam and Mead behind the Hoover Dam, the one you've almost certainly seen in photographs. They aren't two separate lakes sitting side by side. They're on the same river, one above the other. Lake Powell is upstream. Lake Mead is downstream. Water flows into Powell first, and then Powell releases it down to Mead. So Mead is refilled largely by whatever the dam upstream lets through. Think of two buckets on a staircase. The top one catches the water, then pours into the one below it. Everything that happens next comes down to that arrangement. Now, the simplest way to think about them is as the country's two biggest savings accounts, except instead of holding money, they hold water. In wet years, deposits go in. In dry years, withdrawals come out. Between them, these two lakes store roughly 80% of all the water in the entire Colorado River system. And an enormous number of people are living off those savings. The Colorado River supplies drinking water to about 40 million Americans, more than 1 in 10 people in the country. Las Vegas pipes its water straight out of Lake Mead. And it doesn't stop at drinking water. The river irrigates about 5.5 million acres of farmland, a huge share of the vegetables Americans eat in the winter. And the dams themselves are power plants. Together, the system generates more than 8 billion kilowatt hours of electricity every year, enough to power around 700,000 homes. You see, a dam doesn't have to be empty to stop working. Long before the water runs out, the level drops too low to spin the turbines that generate electricity. Engineers call that point minimum power pool. At Glen Canyon Dam, it sits at an elevation of 3,490 feet. In mid-July 2026, Lake Powell measured at 3,524 feet. Do the subtraction, and you get roughly 34 feet of water between where the lake is today and the moment one of America's largest dams can no longer make power. 34 feet sounds like a comfortable cushion until you see how fast these lakes fall. Lake Mead dropped more than 6 feet in a single month this spring. Now, how bad is it really? Well, bad enough to break a record that has stood since before most of us were born. On July 12, 2026, Lake Powell sat at 3,524 feet, and Lake Mead just under 1,043 feet. Put together, the two reservoirs now hold less water than at any point since 1957, back when Glen Canyon Dam was still under construction and Lake Powell didn't yet exist. In simple words, there is less water stored in this system today than there was before half the system was even built. And researchers expect that record to keep breaking day after day until next spring's snowmelt finally arrives. Now to the part I promised you. Since Lake Powell is very close to losing its ability to generate power, federal water managers decided to prop it up. In April 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation announced an emergency plan to send extra water down from a reservoir upstream called Flaming Gorge, and, crucially, cut back the amount of water Lake Powell releases downstream into Lake Mead. Normally, Powell sends about 7.5 million acre-feet a year down to Mead. Under the emergency plan, that drops to 6 million. And now, the buckets on that staircase matter. To keep the top one from running dry, you stop pouring into the bottom one. The agency didn't hide it. It stated plainly that holding water back would accelerate the downstream decline of Lake Mead. So the plan to rescue one reservoir speeds up the collapse of the other. And Lake Mead is heading toward a cliff of its own. Not a figure of speech, an actual line at an actual elevation, 1,035 feet above sea level at the Hoover Dam. Why call it a cliff instead of just another slow decline? Because up to that point, the damage is gradual. As a lake drops, there's less weight of water pressing down on the turbines, so the dam produces slightly less power each year, a slope you can plan around. But 1,035 feet is different. The Hoover Dam has 17 turbines, and 12 of them simply weren't built to operate in water that shallow. So when the lake crosses that line, you don't lose a little power. You lose most of it, almost all at once. The dam's generating capacity gets cut by roughly 70%. And Lake Mead is sitting only a few feet above that line right now. Federal forecasts have it crossing sometime in the coming months, possibly this fall. Longer-term projections show it sliding toward 1,020 feet by next summer, and potentially near 1,011 feet by 2028. Every one of those numbers is below the cliff. When that power disappears, utilities have to buy replacement electricity elsewhere, usually at a higher price. And those higher prices don't stay with the utility. They end up on somebody's monthly bill. So, how did we get here? Well, it's actually two things, stacked on top of each other. The first is drought. The Colorado Basin has been drying out for more than 2 decades, and this year's winter snowpack, the snow that melts each spring and refills these lakes, hit a record low across the upper Colorado. Less snow means less water arriving. It really is that simple. The second reason is harder to talk about because it involves choices rather than weather. The river is overpromised. The rules dividing it up were written a century ago, during an unusually wet stretch of years, and they hand out more water than the river actually carries in a normal year. Everyone was given a slice of a pie that turned out to be smaller than anyone measured. And where does all that water actually go? Mostly not to cities. A 2024 study found that irrigated agriculture accounts for about 74% of the river's direct human use, 3 times more than every other use combined. The single biggest consumer isn't a city or a factory or a golf course. It's cattle feed. Alfalfa and similar crops swallow roughly 46% of all the water people take from the Colorado. That's not to say that farmers are the villains here. They're growing what the market pays them to grow, under rules written long before anyone saw this coming. But it does mean the math of this crisis runs through hayfields at least as much as it runs through faucets. Now, there's one more piece to this. The agreements managing how 7 states share the Colorado River expire at the end of this year. A replacement was supposed to be negotiated by now. It hasn't been finished. Some states have threatened lawsuits. Others have floated last-minute proposals. So the region is walking into the worst water shortage in its modern history without a settled rulebook for who gives up what. In the meantime, some are simply buying time, literally. In July, Southern California's largest water agency agreed to leave up to 200,000 acre-feet of its supply sitting in Lake Mead in exchange for $65 million. That's where things stand, paying people not to take water. None of this means the taps run dry tomorrow. Cities across the Southwest have gotten dramatically better at conserving, and there are still moves left on the board. But the room to maneuver keeps shrinking, and every remaining option costs something: money, electricity, farmland, or someone's share of the river. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the...
So yeah, that's that video there. So this is what's happening, right? This is slowly what's happening. But this is part of what the Lord is bringing upon the earth, all right? Because like I said, in 2 Esdras chapter 9, he's going to visit the world which he made, all right? And this visitation is going to come in the form of disasters, which is, ultimately what is for judgment, all right? So yeah, so let's jump over here to and tie these other things in here, all right, so we can get the bigger picture. Okay, so I have this typed in here. It says August 16th, which is surprising. I thought it was more recent than that. But anyways, I just typed in global famine, just something simple so we can pull up what we need. And so I went back and pulled up my conversation from the chat. So it says global hunger and famine conditions are worsening, with active concurrent famines confirmed in parts of Sudan and Gaza. Over 266 million people face crisis level hunger worldwide. All right, now mind you, this is a global famine. Now we're talking about globally. All right, we're talking about Babylon the Great for a second. Now we're going to talk about globally. All right, because this is something that's is going to be major. It's going to be global. All right, it's going to be happening amongst Jacob's trouble. This is what's going to drive people into, that survival mode. All right, no food, no water, no real resources. Okay, people hungry, have to feed themselves or the family or their children or whatever the case may be. Cannibalism, so on and so forth. So they're going to result to violence. It is driven primarily by armed conflict, climate shocks, economic instability, and steep cuts to international humanitarian aid funding. Current hotspots and famine zones: Sudan, all right, Gaza. I'm not going to read too deeply into all these different things. Sudan, Gaza. Other high-risk hotspots: the UN Food and Agriculture Organization highlights critical hunger concerns in South Sudan, Yemen, Nigeria, Somalia, Haiti, and Afghanistan due to localized violence and disrupted supply chains. All right. Core drivers of modern famine: armed conflict. Roughly 80% of the people facing catastrophic food insecurity live in active war zones. That's part of prophecy too. Wars and rumors of wars. Got proxy wars happening, all right? Where farming, distribution, and markets are completely blocked. Right? Humanitarian funding shortages. Global aid contributions have dropped significantly, restricting organizations like the World Food Program from delivering essential rations. Right, climate extremes, that's been a major talk too. Extended droughts, All right, extended droughts, severe flooding, and erratic weather patterns continuously destroy local harvest and livestock in fragile regions. All right, so these are the types of things that are happening, globally. All right, not just Babylon the Great, but Babylon the Great will be, you know, uh, uh, um, in a very slippery place. See what else? Okay, so I have some more stuff here. So, how are the Hormuz and Gate of Tears affecting the farmers worldwide? So, the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el Mandeb, historically known as the Gate of Tears, are acting as major bottleneck economic choke points that directly squeeze farmers' profitability and crop yields worldwide. Which we know that from the start of this uptick of this conflict between Persia and Babylon the Great, well, and the SOI, but we clearly see that the SOI are sitting on their hands, and it's just Persia and Babylon, right? But anyways, it says while these waterways are usually discussed in terms of oil, their ongoing disruptions and blockade. Yeah, we talked about that the other day. The illusion of plenty, all right, the illusion of having more oil than what they really have, all right. J.P. Morgan says their ongoing disruptions and blockades since early 2026 have severely shocked global agriculture. All right, that's very major because that's a major process into what's going to happen next here on this globe. So the fertilizer starvation crisis. The Persian Gulf region is an agricultural powerhouse producing and exporting over 60 million tons of fertilizers and essential raw materials annually. Right, the Hormuz blockade, roughly 45 million tons of these nutrients are shipped directly through the Strait of Hormuz following military conflicts and blockades that began in February 2026. Tanker traffic plummeted by over 95%. Tanker traffic plummeted by 95%. And mind you, things are to go around the globe to different places. So that's very, very major. Massive price surges. The Gulf accounts for 41% of global urea exports, a foundational nitrogen fertilizer. That's what the farmers need, right? So if they're not getting it, then what does that mean, right? They're not planting their full yield if they're able to plant at all, or they have to transition to planting something different than what they would usually plant. So the sudden supply freeze caused nitrogen urea prices to surge by roughly 80%, hitting heights over $850 per metric ton. The sourcing dilemma. Farmers globally are forced to choose between paying exorbitant prices or cutting back on crop nutrients. The Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, warns that skipping fertilizer applications will sharply decrease crop yields for future harvest. All right. So doubled shipping costs and massive delays. The Gate of Tears controls access to the Suez Canal. Ongoing maritime security threats at both this strait and Hormuz have broken standard shipping logistics. Longer freight routes. Container ships transporting agricultural machinery, seeds, and harvested crops can no longer safely pass through these straits. Instead, they must reroute entirely around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. All right, so taking almost another 2 weeks to a month to get to where they're going. All right, and that's if they go at all. More than likely they will. Um, but it leaves a scarcity, right? Compounded overhead, rerouting, and then also it's costly. So if they can't afford it, then eventually even that stops. Compounded overhead, rerouting adds weeks to delivery timelines, and drastically increases fuel consumption, insurance premiums, and freight fees. Yep. It says farmers ultimately absorb these costs when buying tools or trying to export their goods. All right. And it says regional impacts on global farmers. The impact is felt differently depending on how reliant a country's agricultural sector is on Middle Eastern imports. And we're not going to read to all of this. Let's see, United States and Europe, higher domestic production cost. While some farmers pre-purchased fertilizer, market analysts project sustained high input costs into 2027 and 2028. Yeah, they might have pre-purchased, but if they can't get it, then it doesn't really matter. Um, yeah, I see. Crop shifting. We just talked about that. So okay, and that's it for there, right there. So just to pull that up, real quick, all right, because tying in, the heat, the extreme heat, all right, what plays a part into the drought, and then you have waters drying up. So all these things factor into what? All right, a major, famine, global famine, but as particularly we're talking about Babylon the Great, but yeah, global famine. So let's see if we can pull up. I could probably get rid of that. We'll pull up this first. So 2 Esdras 16 and 17. All right, I know it's the same scriptures over and over and over and over. All right, but we got to keep bringing it out. Woe is me, who will deliver me in those days, in the times of Jacob's trouble, which we did turn into already. The beginning of sorrows and great mournings. The beginning, see, the beginning of famine. We're seeing these things happen. We're seeing the beginning of a global famine. All right, as Yahushua prophesied and warned about, you shall hear wars and rumors of wars, pestilences, famines, all right, and earthquakes in diverse places. All right, all these things are the beginning of sorrows. They have to happen. All right, but he told us to be in our trouble. All right, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, and the power shall stand in fear. The beginning of evils, you see, because all these things are going to bring more evils on the earth. Matthew 24. The love of many shall wax cold. All right, wax cold goes to the word psycho. Okay, and these people are getting worse and worse, and when all hell breaks loose, all right, they're just going to basically lose it. All right, so the beginning of evils. What shall I do when these evils shall come? Yeah, when all these judgments and these plagues and these different things that the Lord is bringing upon the earth happens. Behold, famine and plague, tribulation and anguish are sent as scourges for amendment. But for all these things they shall not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of the scourges. Yeah, prophets prophesy before things happen. All right, then things happen, whether it's major or not. Some things happen, and then our people still don't get it. So they don't listen to the prophets. They don't repent to the Heavenly Father, and then the Lord does what? He brings more things. He brings more judgment. Behold, victuals shall be so good cheap upon earth that they shall think themselves to be in good case. Yeah, when prices are good, people think that things are, all good and dandy. And even then shall evils grow upon earth, sword, famine, and great confusion. See that? For many of them that dwell upon earth shall perish of famine. See? Lamentations 4. It is better to die by the sword than by famine, because these pine away, stricken through for the wants of the fruits of the field. Hunger is a slow, painful death. All right? It's best to just, for someone to be deleted in some other kind of fashion than to die by hunger and thirst, because it's slow and painful. And eventually your body eats away at itself. All right? And this is why people are going to resort to cannibalism, because they're going to be to that broken point where there is nothing. All right? People are going to eat, people probably going to be chewing on acorns and stuff like that, bark, trees, all right? Hey, leather, people did that before in the past. Leather, belts, all right? People are going to be eating whatever they can eat, and it's going to do nothing but what? Upset their stomach. They're probably going to vomit it up. They're going to become more sick, okay? They're going to result to cannibalism, their own children or other people. So these things cannot be avoided, because these things are coming as judgment in these latter days. All right. That's why we pray constantly. All right. Repent constantly and pray constantly to the Lord that we be shielded, protected with that hedge of protection from these violent, evil days that are coming, man, because they're not going to stop. All right. The Lord has already sent forth his word. Okay. And because someone doesn't believe doesn't mean that the Lord is not going to be faithful to that word. Unfaithful to that word. So it says, for many of them that dwell upon earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy. See? And the dead shall be cast out as dung, and there shall be no man to comfort them, for the earth shall be wasted, and the city shall be cast down. There shall be no man left to till the earth and to sow it. The trees shall give fruit, and who shall gather them? The grapes shall ripen, and who shall tread them? For all places shall be desolate of men. Yeah, no more of that farm labor. It's already been, squeezed upon now. But eventually, there's going to be no more of that regular labor. Any farm labor that's going to be going on is going to be Esau, all right, playing his garbage in those fields. All right, and that's only if he's not lab making everything else. All right. So, anyways, it says, so that one man shall desire to see another and to hear his voice. For of a city there shall be 10 left, and 2 of the field, which shall hide themselves in the thick groves and in the clefts of the rocks. Yeah, because all the madness is going to be going on. All right, everybody's going to be in survival mode. I'm just trying to get what we needed here. That's pretty much, and we could read down to that too. Excuse me, but I just wanted to get, you know, that particular portion directly with the famine, because it's also a little bit there down below. And we'll go over here and get this. All right, that third seal, famine. All right, and when he had opened the third seal, I heard the beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. All right, I actually need to go back through this chapter again myself. Maybe I'll do that. Listen to it and you know, just go back to it to keep it fresh. All right, because this is one of those, you know, Revelation chapters, so this is about the end times. But it says, and I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, which actually links back up to what we just read, 2nd Ezra, the 16th chapter. All right. So you know, like we said before, when things seem to be good, people have this no sense of urgency. All right, they seem like they feel like there's no threat. Okay, but it says when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, and that's what's about to happen. All right, and that's the only way for the Lord to get people's attention, is to actually bring judgment, bring disasters, right, bring calamities upon this earth. All right, and then people will pay attention. Okay, and that's exactly what the Lord is doing. Okay, and we're just particularly talking about, you know, what we've been talking about over and over and over and over and over, the famine. I just looked up 144 or 1044, but hey, 144 on the screen. All right, and I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see, thou heard not the oil and the wine. And the truth, all right, that the prophets hold is going to be the only thing that's important. Like it says, wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. Even says that the Lord, which there's going to be actual famine and stuff like that. But it says not a famine of bread or water, but a thirst of hearing the word. All right. And this is what's about to hit 2/3 of our people very heavy. All right. Because their everyday life is just that, the same every single day. All right. They have no sense of urgency. They have no fear of the Lord, and they don't plan on repenting. Right. But the Lord is going to bring judgment upon Babylon the Great and the earth. And one of those major forms of judgment is going to be famine. All right. There's going to be a lot of death, and disease is going to breed from it too. All right. But yeah, that's pretty much it there. All right. And yeah, and people are going to, trying to, get what they can get for whatever price. All right. We talked about the UBI. People are going to be ready and willing to sign up for the UBI. They're going to be ready and willing to sign up for the CHIP as well. All right, because of these things that the Lord is bringing upon the earth. All right, but that's pretty much it. No need to force it. Lord willing, you edify to this. Now that's what I'm going to say. Shalom.